If I was to write a book that said how to survive being published, there'd be a chapter on a bit of honesty that said, right, Doug, we're a big publisher, we're giving you a bit of money for your book, and now you're on your own.
Hello and welcome to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. My name is Doug Johnstone. I'm a novelist and short story writer primarily, and an RLF fellow, of course. This podcast is aiming to give a more rounded picture of the writing life than we often see in the media. We'll be dipping into the RLF archives as we go, listening to short pieces by other RLF writers as launching off points for our conversations. So with me today, I'm absolutely delighted to have Howard Linskey. How are you doing, Howard?
I'm very good, thanks, and it's great to be here, Doug.
So just in case there's a few people in the world who don't know who you are.
Surely not.
So Howard is primarily known as a crime writer, I guess.
Yep.
20 books, not all of them crime novels.
That's true.
But your first novel was published in 2011, The Drop, under your own name. So there's been a couple of series, some standalone books. There have been historical fiction. Your most recent book is a Shakespeare mystery, which I'm hopeful we'll talk about soon. And also, if we get time, I want to talk about the Little Book of Pintfulness.
The self-help book. About beer and drinking.
So how are you doing today, Howard? How do we find you today? Good?
Very well, thanks. Yeah, good journey in, which you can't always guarantee these days when you use the train, so that helps. Yeah.
So
I'm in a
the
good
first thing we want to talk about in this podcast is usually something topical. So we're kind of celebrating in May is the birth of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So, as me and you are both crime writers, we should get into it. So, how do we feel about Sherlock Holmes? Was it a big thing for you?
Well, yes and no. I feel quite guilty because I don't think I've actually read any of the books. But like all kids my age, and I ain't young anymore, I grew up surrounded by the Sherlock Holmes stuff. I mean, as a youngster in the 70s and 80s, they had the old movies kept being repeated, the Basil Rathbone ones.
Yeah, I remember The Hound of the Baskervilles was proper scary, right?
It was proper stuff. It was more like a horror than a crime story. And then you had Jeremy Brett later on TV a lot, right up to the Benedict Cumberbatch years. So he's always been there. I mean, so many actors have played him over the years. And he keeps getting reinvented, which I think is a lesson to everybody writing crime now. You can look at any historical figure and reinvent them and bring them into the modern world. So that's quite helpful.
Yeah, it's sort of weird thinking about it because I mean I'm actually like you. I'm sure I have read a Sherlock Holmes book, but I couldn't tell you.
I won't test you. Don't worry.
But it's interesting that me and you are about roughly the same age, of a certain age, but we grew up and it was absolutely omnipresent. That whole golden age of crime fiction, like Agatha Christie seemed to be on the television all the time and Sherlock Holmes all the time. So we kind of, in a way, we probably didn't realise it, but we grew up with that mystery element like right there in our faces the whole time.
And I'm sure we're absorbing it consciously or self-consciously. And Agatha Christie in particular, I have actually read some Agatha Christie books, but way more movies and TV programmes I've seen written or adapted from the Agatha Christie stuff. And I still like them. I like Branagh's films, which are a bit, I know they divide people, but I like them and I go to the cinema and see them. I'm not afraid to say that.
That's just the moustache, isn't it? His moustache.
It is. The moustache in the first one was a bit bonkers. I think he's trimmed it a little since then, but I still enjoy those. And I like it when people take old stuff and reinvent them as long as they are, true to the original and done affectionately and well.
Yeah, but I guess it's weird because, I mean, neither one of us writes crime fiction that in any way replicates that sort of thing, do we?
No.
I mean, so I wonder if you get anything from that. Is it about how to grab the reader or the viewer?
I think so.
I
think it's setting up that mystery element, which is the same as you said, grabbing the reader. Mainly early on, it doesn't necessarily have to be the first page, but you're setting something up where people are being introduced to characters. Hopefully, the characters are good enough, or at least not so much good, but well written enough that you care about the characters, whether they're good, bad, or medium in terms of character, and you want to know what happens next. You want to keep watching or turning the page in the case of a book. So I guess that is something that runs through the stories. Good stories like the Agatha Christie ones and the Conan Doyle ones, they have you caring about the characters and wanting to know what happens next, right up to the end of the story.
Yeah. So I wonder if neither of us was reading those books necessarily as kids, what was influencing your your foray into crime writing originally then? Was there something else that you were reading a lot of?
I look back with deep shame in the 70s, long before J.K. Rowling, the kind of people I hung out with, reading was for swads, or, it wasn't manly, it wasn't... So I was always playing football or, attempting to climb trees badly.
Yeah.
And being told off for reading comics.
Right.
Which is kind of ironic because most of my World War II historical knowledge that I had as a youngster came from reading Battle Picture Weekly and Commando and various things.
Commando, God,
it's good stuff, and we share an agent who likes all that kind of thing as well, Phil. So I read a lot of that stuff, and I did read books, but I grew up really enthralled by film and the storytelling in film. So I was more likely to go and want to watch something like Where Eagles Dare, or The Eagle Has Landed, or anything with the eagle in the title that would grab me and take me to a cinema. So I grew up as a big film fan. And initially as a writer, I thought, I'd quite like to write films, not realising that, it's quite difficult to be someone starting out writing a script and possibly getting a filmmaker to invest millions of pounds in it. So really, you need to start in a more democratic world, writing for something smaller, and then maybe ease into the writing world. And in my case, writing a book that got me an agent wasn't the first one that was published, but then I wrote some others. And eventually, I went to Agent Phil with an idea for a book, which turned into The Drop. And I remember vividly saying to him at one point, I suppose it's a crime novel, really. I mean, because I wasn't a big crime aficionado. I think I wrongly thought they were all a bit like Rebus, the detectives who were a bit gnarly with personal issues, and and I thought, I don't really know how to write that. But my white collar gangster guy was clearly operating in the crime world, and it struck me as I always want to write the story first and then think, oh yeah, what genre is that? Oh yeah, crime. Okay, fine. I'm not averse to it, but I don't set out to write a crime novel. Yeah, I just have an idea.
I have a feeling that's really common, a lot more common than people think. As growing up, I wasn't really aware of what genre was. I didn't really understand it. I didn't particularly read crime novels either. And I wasn't aware that my first novel was a crime novel. I mean, it's stupid thinking back about it. There was dead bodies, but it wasn't in that it wasn't a police procedural. No. So it didn't have that framework
that
you're aware of with like Taggart or whatever was on the television. Yeah. So it didn't occur to me. But I remember Ian Rankin even said that he didn't realise he was writing crime fiction. In his case, come on.
That's reassuring when he says that.
But he claims to have walked into a bookshop and actually said, "Oh, you don't have my book in here?" And they said, "Oh, it's in the crime section." And he was like, "What? Is that really Ian Rankin with your grumpy detective?"
That's hilarious, because that's what I thought crime was. I thought they were all about detectives solving things, or police procedurals, as people say. And when it comes to subgenres, I spent years going, I don't know. People have said I've written police procedurals. I'm like, have I? I don't know. There's a policeman in it. But I don't really do the whole forensic stuff generally. There's a little bit of forensics in there, but I know surely a police procedural is very much about the investigation. And I'm more about the characters and who did what to whom and why, and the mystery of finding out the outcome at the end. And if I put forensics in there, it's in for half a page, not 7 pages on an autopsy or something. So I don't know. I'm loosely a crime writer, and I wrote other stuff as well. But like you, I didn't think about genre. Yeah. Because if you read widely, I don't think you always walk into a bookshop when you're younger and go, I'm going to go to that genre's shelves and pick that. You're just attracted by literally a cover or a blurb or something you've heard about a book, and you read it.
Yeah. It's almost like we planned it, Howard. That leads us nicely into the first archive slot that we're going to listen to, which is it's Leslie Glaister talking about being genre fluid.
Years ago, a publisher invited me to a meeting to discuss my work. "We're all puzzled that you don't sell more books," she said, over tea and hobnobs. "And we wonder if you might try making your characters more normal." Meekly, I crept away, feeling puzzled and stung, but willing to consider the idea. By normal, I took her to mean more mainstream or relatable. But my characters were, and are, normal as far as I'm concerned. Normal to me, at least. I did try writing something with the normal injunction in mind, but, hampered by self-consciousness, succeeded in creating a hideously flat and wooden cipher on pages fit only for the recycling bin. On another occasion, my agent suggested that I turn my hand to writing crime. He pointed out that crimes often occur in my novels, but that I don't make them central to the plot. Why not bring them forward? Temporarily lured by the idea of megabucks, I did try writing a crime novel. I churned out about 20,000 words of something pacey, starting with a body and a feisty private detective. It was working in its own terms, but I found my interest waning. I couldn't really care about the characters, and the ghastly self-consciousness set in again. So I put it aside and returned to writing. But writing what? It's a mystery that Leslie Glaister isn't better known is the sort of well-meant yet maddening comment that often turns up in reviews of my novels. And of course, this is the issue that my editor and agent were addressing. And fair enough. Their advice wasn't bad in itself, only uncomfortable for me to follow. After all, there are many literary novelists who've successfully turned their hand to writing crime, either alongside or instead of their original work. The trouble is that, although I occasionally read crime fiction, I'm not naturally drawn to writing it, and have discovered that I can't bring myself to write something the length of a novel if my heart isn't in it. I only want to write the stories I feel compelled to tell, and where these arise from and why, I really don't know or even want to know. My novels are categorised as literary fiction, but some are in part psychological thriller. Most contain elements of suspense. Crimes occur. Some have historical settings. Others are somewhat gothic and macabre. I once found one shelved in a horror section. Of course, this kind of genre fluidity isn't particularly unusual among fiction writers, but it is why my editor and agent tried to get me to go in one way or the other, be more mainstream literary, whatever that means, or else go headlong into genre, rather than sitting on what, it seems to me, is an arbitrary fence. This, of course, makes sense, particularly to booksellers and marketers of fiction. But I find that I can only feel comfortable and authentic straddling that wobbly, genre-fluid fence. So on that fence, I'll stay.
So Howard, that was really interesting. That actually echoed quite a lot of what we were just discussing. So what is your approach to genre? Because you've written in several different genres.
Yeah,
so
I was trying to tot that up the other day. I think it's either 5 or 6,
yeah,
depending on how you view things. But it's because I'm story-led, and I get an idea for a story, or I pick up something and think, oh, I'd like to write about that. And then the genre bit comes after. So, I get gripped by my World War II books. The first one was about the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich in Prague in 1942. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to tell the story of it because it was a bit like the Day of the Jackal and the Eagle Has Landed, that kind of thriller, old-fashioned thriller. And it was only as I was putting the notes down together and doing the research, I was thinking, I suppose this is, you could call it a thriller, you could call it historical, a fictionalized, dramatized version of something real. But I don't worry too much about that. I just sort of think other people can stick a label on it afterwards.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really interesting what Leslie was saying in that clip, because I write what I want to write and I'm really passionate about writing. I wouldn't like to write something that I wasn't particularly really keen to do. And I would feel the way she felt about it, a little bit false. So if somebody paid me a lot of money to go and write something out of my comfort zone, I'm sure I could do it professionally. I could achieve the goal. You would get something, but it wouldn't be as good as something I felt really into and really wanted to write and tell the story of and express myself about. So I thought that was quite an interesting point she made.
Well, yeah, and also, I think one of the things that's interesting about you is taking that even further in terms of genre is that you've ghostwritten a couple of memoirs. So that must have been, how did that come about, first of all? Were they stories that you were aware of, or did you... Because you mentioned about, I'm not suggesting you're getting big bucks for these, but it's...
No, not necessarily,
that feels like it's employing a slightly different set of skills, right?
Yes. So I was lucky in a way that I was a journalist. So to me, the writing those stories felt quite natural because I was doing what I used to do as a journalist. I'd turn up somewhere, I'd meet somebody, I would get their story down in 20 minutes or so, go away and write for the newspaper. Did that for several years. And it was very good practice for all writing, but certainly for this kind of writing. The first one came about because Nick Dunn, the subject of Surviving Hell, who was wrongly imprisoned in India for 5 years, having done nothing illegal, but it was a very political case, and it was to do with him being on a boat where he was armed to keep Somali pirates off the boat, and they were all arrested for being in the wrong territorial waters and for having allegedly illegal weapons, but they weren't illegal. So it was a very political story. He would have liked Damian Lewis to write his story, the non-fiction military author. That guy was far too busy because he's doing extremely well at the moment, turning out various SAS memoirs and things like that. We had a mutual contact. It was my agent, Agent Phil. And I said, when he told me the story, I said, well, I'd be up for writing something like that because I'm fascinated by, A, the story, and B, the kind of man who Nick is. He's a former para. The parachute regiment have always intrigued me because they do things I could never do. If you paid me huge amounts of money or cajoled me, I wouldn't be able to throw myself out of planes and things. So Phil and I got on a train, went up to Newcastle, met Nick. I guess the North East Heritage helped a little bit. We shared that. And I sat with him and his sister, and we had lunch. And during the course of this lunch, while we were talking about me potentially doing this story, I immediately said to him after a few moments of listening to him, that's where we're going to start the book. The bit where you thought you were going to be released and you weren't, you were sentenced to further imprisonment. Okay. We're not going to start with you were born in whatever year in Ashington and tell the story chronologically. We're going to hook the people in. And we just got on very well, the three of us, because his sister was involved in the story. So that one was great to write. And then he asked me to do a favour for him and speak to a guy who used to be Princess Diana's bodyguard, who wanted some advice on the writing world. And cutting a very long story short, after 45 minutes of talking to the fella, giving him advice, we both started to do this gentle courtship thing where, if only I had someone who could write that for me. And me thinking, well, he's had a very interesting life. Yeah. And he worked undercover in Northern Ireland, and he almost died in Libya and Somalia and did incredible stuff. And again, stuff I can't do. And I always respect people who do incredible things. And the key to writing the books really was neither of them could write. That was the only thing they couldn't do. They couldn't write their own story, so I had to do it for them. But I had to write it in their voice, not mine. Yeah. So and luckily we had a slightly shared upbringing in the sense that I'm not from a world wildly dissimilar to theirs. Yeah. So I think I can't use the word Nick used, but he said, "Don't make me look like when you write what I'm saying," because when you interview someone, they like I'm doing now, they chunder on a bit and you have to frame that and write it structurally correctly. But he meant don't use words he wouldn't use, that he's going to get laughed at in the pub for me saying he used them. And I understood that from where I'm from, a small town in the northeast of England. I thought you don't use posh words when you're in the pub, otherwise they'd throw you out or mock you or pour beer on you or something. Yeah. So that was the important part. Their story, they had to be happy with it, and I had to write it in their voice. That was the challenge for non-fiction. Yeah.
The most recent genre you've dipped into is now historical crime or Elizabethan mysteries, or what are we calling them?
Oh,
you've written, your book has just come out in January, the first in the Shakespeare mystery series. So tell us about this. It sounds incredible.
Oh no, I mean, God, I go off at tangents, don't I? But I've always been fascinated by Shakespeare ever since I went to say the RSC in Stratford at 17 on a school holiday that I thought I was going to have to endure. Because, the trade-off was you can be away for a week from your parents, sort of vaguely supervised by teachers who didn't mind back then if you went to the pub and had a drink, because they were certainly doing that. Yeah. There was no ID back then, nobody cared. There was another school coming, so that meant girls who didn't know me, so that was helpful, because they hadn't seen me grow up and make a complete mess. And I thought, the penalty for this is I've got to sit through 3 Shakespearean plays. And by the end of the week, I was knocked out by at least 2 of them. So I've always been fascinated by Shakespeare, and I'm like, well, who is he? Where's he from? What was? I know he's from Stratford, but what was his background? Yeah. And what was really intriguing to me is there are 7 lost years in Shakespeare's life. Nobody knows what he did from the age of 21 to 28. 28, he rocks back up in London, having written Henry VI.
Like you do,
and nobody knows what he did. And then a year later, he had enough money from being pretty poor to become a partner in a theatrical company. So he needed at least 50 quid in old money, and he only got 2 for the play. So where did he get the other 48? And I thought, there's the starting point. And that was the start of my first Shakespeare mystery, A Serpent in the Garden.
Oh, that's amazing.
So,
So,
yeah.
it's published by Canelo, right? So,
Yes.
And that's what leads me to one thing I wanted to have a talk about in terms of genre as well, because you've got these different genres have quite often been with different publishers. And have they had very different attitudes towards it? I have the impression, because we've both been published by big and small publishers in the past, and I have the impression that I certainly have a lot more free reign with a smaller publisher in terms of they're not prescriptive about what you're writing in any way. What's your experience been like?
It was a little bit like that. I think I was quite surprised by the big publisher being quite conservative or cautious, maybe, about characters not looking sympathetic enough that we're supposed to be rooting for. And I don't really get that, because a lot of good movies and TV series, the characters are very edgy, very out there.
Yeah.
And the TV world seems to have moved on from that idea that you can't be nuanced and complicated. So I used to have a little bit of a struggle sometimes to say, I know he's a little unsympathetic on page 25, or she's a bit unsympathetic on page 50, but that's human beings. We're complicated.
That's the worst feedback for a book ever. Is that I get that all the time. It's like, oh, the central character's not sympathetic enough.
No,
it's like,
I mean,
have you met real people?
Yeah. And have
Also,
you seen good TV lately?
Yeah. Also, would it be an interesting story if they were just a nice person doing nice things?
Yes, exactly. I mean, that is the struggle as a writer. How do you make them remotely interesting unless they have faults? And I think it's down to the writer to come up with a balance to give a character enough faults that they might make the reader be a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure I like him for a moment, but then maybe redeem himself a little bit. And I like more complicated characters than that.
Yeah.
So I found that a little bit more with the big publisher, and I also found working with smaller publishers, they tend to be more creative around things like marketing and PR, and constantly trying to come up with good ideas to push the books out there and do more events and things. And when I first rocked up at Penguin, I went, events, how do you feel about me carrying on doing events? And they went, well, if you like. It's just like, what we really care about is getting the book into supermarkets. Yeah. And there was an obsession with supermarkets, getting the books. And I'd deliver a book and they'd say, it's a great book and we really believe in your writing. And then there'd be a pause and they'd go, let's hope the supermarkets take it. And I think, oh gosh, what if they don't?
It seems like, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I wanted the publishing...
Separate podcast.
Yeah, I think that is a separate one. I won't go into
series.
But that sort of, I mean, they're so in hock to supermarkets. Publishers don't seem to have any other ideas for what to do.
No, I know. I keep in touch with people that I've worked with in the past, and the guy who ran No Exit, Ian Mills, I'm still in touch with him. And I remember quite early on when he said, you've been with Penguin a couple of years, and I'd love to know a few of their marketing ideas. And I thought for a moment, actually, no, you do them already. It's fine. They're not. It's not like there's this massive envelope they're pushing.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely knocking Penguin. I don't mean it like that. But it's just there wasn't a lot of. And this is, by the way, as you'll know, this is the world for most authors. Whether you're with a small publisher or a big one, you join a big publisher and you think, oh gosh, they've given me some money for the book. Great, they'll do loads of marketing, and that isn't going to be the case because you realise after a bit of time that they focus on what they call lead titles. Yeah. Or possibly lead authors. Yeah. And those are either guys who are the very big names already, or possibly celebrities who've written a crime novel or something like that. I mean, that's fine. If they've written it themselves, I'm totally fine with it. Yeah. But the budget for the marketing and all the PR momentum goes on those books. And you realise that after a little bit of time. So I think if I was to write a book that said how to survive being published, there'd be a chapter on a bit of honesty that said, right, Doug, we're a big publisher. We're giving you a bit of money for your book. And now you're on your own. Yeah. It's like teaching kids to swim the old way, where we throw them in the water and hope they can doggy paddle to the other side.
Yeah. So let's get away from the depressing industry.
Yeah, all right.
Because I want to talk a little bit about craft. So again, coming back to this crime fiction thing, we're kind of both right in this area. Although I guess we're not typically thought of, that standard police procedural or whatever. So I wonder, what is your kind of relationship with like the tropes of crime fiction? Because, I mean, people can call them cliches if they want, but I prefer tropes because it's slightly less.
Sounds posher and less derogatory, isn't it?
Slightly less derogatory. But I think that you have to be aware what they are, right, in the first place, because you're in a kind of weird relationship with what people are expecting, the reader's expectations, aren't you?
Yes, and I guess I'm probably more so now, but when I first started, I'm smiling here because one of the first interviews I ever did for the debut book, The Drop, the guy asked me if I deliberately set out to break the rules of crime fiction, or some of them.
Oh, really?
And I must admit, my first reaction was, there are rules?
Give yourself a pat on the back.
Nobody passed me the rules.
Did you not get the rule book?
No, nobody sent me the rule book, and I went to the library and there wasn't one. But yes, I get what he meant. And I can't quite remember, looking back, it was a long time ago, I can't remember what those rules that I accidentally broke were. But I do think, some people seem to think you've got to put a body on page one, and it has to be he's dead, sir, he was obviously murdered, let's try and find out who did it. I do prefer to have a bit more of a mysterious element to it if I can, where in the past I've occasionally written a story where someone just disappeared, and that leaves it more open. So the explanation could be further down the line. A, they were murdered. B, they committed suicide. C, they were abducted. D, they ran away for reasons that, eventually become apparent. And I like that open-endedness a bit, where the person doing the investigation, whether that is a police officer, or in the past I've had journalists, or in the new one, Shakespeare, he's trying to find out. He didn't have a lot of forensic evidence to go on back then, no DNA. But
no mobile phones as well. It must be really useful for you.
Yes. Oh, damn. Did they not have mobile phones back then? I've obviously not done my research thoroughly enough. But yeah, so I like the idea that anything could have happened, except and leaving it more open. So, but I know there are authors who say start with a body on page one, and they have to have been murdered.
Well, it's interesting. I interviewed Denise Miner once, and she said to me, whodunit is only one of like a million questions that you can get the reader to ask. So that's the mystery. You talk about mystery, but there's also suspense. Like I've written books like my novel Hit and Run, which is the worst whodunit of all time, because I tell you whodunit in the first page. It was Billy. Billy did it. Right? But it actually comes back to that idea of, then it's kind of like Elizabethan tragedy or Greek tragedy, because it's how is it going to come back to bite these characters? There's going to be a downfall, but how do they get the reckoning, right?
I like that, yeah.
So it's time for our next archive slot now, which we're going to listen to Martin Waite, who we both know,
good man,
talking a little bit about writing crime fiction set in the Northeast.
I chose Newcastle because, obviously because I didn't think it was particularly well represented at the time, because you had... I really didn't like British crime fiction. I hadn't found anything that I'd really enjoyed at the time in British crime fiction. Or, that I saw in contemporary British crime fiction, the way that I was excited by what the Americans were doing at the time, which was, there was a sense of realism about it. There was a sense of, I recognize this world that they're writing about, that people like James Lee Burke or Sarah Paretsky, or I'm just looking at the bookshelves to see who else, who was just kind of starting at that, Walter Mosley and people,
Yeah.
And it was kind of, I recognize this world that they're talking about, even though I'm not in that country. And I don't recognize the world that I live in British crime fiction. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if you can take that kind of regionalism that they're doing and that noir sensibility and put it in a British regional setting? And that was another light bulb moment. I had that idea at the same time as everybody else did at the same time. It was just like John Harvey did it and Ian Rankin did it and Val did it. And it was like, oh, I'm not that original after all. And I was just kind of coming in on the tail end of them as well, so it was kind of, oh, right, yeah, here's another British crime writer trying to transplant that American thing. It was like, yeah, when I started out, I wasn't another. It's taken me that long to be published.
Yeah.
That I thought it was quite an original idea, So that's kind of where it started from, really.
So, Howard, as people can probably tell by your accent, you're from the Northeast, right?
Indeed, I am, yes.
So,
yes.
Was that ringing any bells for you, the idea of giving a voice to the kind of the crime fiction genre that was something that you recognised where you grew up?
Yeah, the strange thing was I'd left as well long ago. Like a lot of people from where I'm from, particularly as I'm from a small town, not from Newcastle. So Newcastle, like the metropolis for me, 25 miles north of Ferry Hill, where I'm from. There wasn't a lot going on there for me, jobs-wise or opportunity-wise. So when I left to go to college, I just assumed I'd come back, and I never did, because no opportunities ever came for me in the Northeast. So I only ever really went back there for the good things, football matches, stag do's, parties, holidays to family and friends. But obviously, the place stays with you where you're from, I think. And when I wrote my debut, it wasn't a conscious decision. I thought, I've got an idea for a story, and I'm going to write it, and it's about a guy from Newcastle. I didn't even say I'm setting it in Newcastle as opposed to London or Glasgow. But I think when I was writing back then, this would be 2010, when I was writing it, or slightly earlier than that maybe, there wasn't a lot going on outside of London, Glasgow, Edinburgh. Those three cities seemed to be dominating crime at the time. There were some Northeast authors, but there's way more now. And I think things like the success of things like Vera and L.J. Ross's books, Louise Ross's books, going so huge has helped. So when I started out, there was Martin, Sheila Quigley, Mari Hanna, and Danielle Ramsey, and that was about it. Because they had a little table in Waterstones with them on it, and I thought, my ambition is to be on that table one day.
The local writers'
table, and I achieved that ambition. I got there. I was very happy. But now there's other people like Trevor Wood and Rob Scragg, who we both know very well, and writing great stuff set in the northeast of England. The northeast is quite a good place to set crime because you've got the city, like Newcastle, this sprawling city, which is, I love the place, but it also has that sort of slightly dark image, a bit like Glasgow, I suppose, where you think there's a bit of crime there.
Feels like it's got an edge, right?
Yes, an edge. That's exactly what I mean. And then outside of it, you've got all that countryside. You've got all this Northumbrian sprawling, fields, and you're not far from the sea, and it's very atmospheric. And I think certainly Vera have used virtually every location in the northeast of England to highlight that. So it's great to set stories in, whether they're in the back of Beyond or whether it's something happening 10 yards from St James's Park. You can stick a murder.
And do you think it's interesting that you haven't lived there for a long time? And I know that sometimes writers find it easier to write about a place once they've got a bit of distance from it. Is that true?
Possibly,
in your
and I
case?
did wonder if I was a bit like Irish people who come over and rhapsodise about Ireland but never go back. And I thought, am I a bit like that with the northeast? I mean, I do go back all the time, but it's, when I say that, it's like 3 or 4 times a year max, because I live 260 miles away from there, which ironically was roughly the distance I used to live away from London when I lived in Ferry Hill. So to me, London felt like a foreign country, but Newcastle was the metropolis you would always want to go to, whether it was as a kid peering into Fenwick's window or going to see Newcastle play when you were young, usually to see them lose or play badly or what have you. But yeah, I always loved the place, and I've never lost that love, and I still get excited going back there, particularly if I'm on the train and you go over that high railway bridge and you see the Tyne and all the bridges to one side, and I always feel like a spring in my step if I get to Central Station and walk into town, and I go to my favourite pubs on the way to the match and catch it with mates, and so I love going back.
But I don't think your books romanticise it as a city or as an area, because so you're not falling into that trap of American Irish people talking about the homeland or whatever.
That's true. I mean, I think in a crime novel it would be a bit foolish to do that. But yeah, so I'm always a bit wary of thinking, well, I hope people don't think I'm just sort of writing that the entire place is a dangerous, hole that you shouldn't be living in. Yeah. So I try and give it a bit of balance. But the ones that I set in Newcastle, I think they hinted that there was an underbelly that if you were in that world you would see. But I mean, I've not really witnessed anything worse than a fight in the street at kicking out time. And less so these days with CCTV everywhere, and kicking out time is variable now. It's not like that 11 o'clock thing where everybody used to get thrown out and occasionally someone would start scrapping.
I got my debut novel, Tombstoning, was set in Arbroath, where I grew up. Again, I didn't write about it until I was in my 30s, actually. And it got a review in the Arbroath Herald, which said, it was totally slated at saying, this person obviously hates Arbroath. Nobody who likes Arbroath should read this book.
I love that there are people out there that think, if you hint that there might be crime in Arbroath or Newcastle, that you're somehow a traitor. Yeah. You only have to pick up the local paper to see that. So that's what always used to fascinate me, was looking at the Chronicle in Newcastle. They'd say some guy's just been sentenced to 11 years for dealing. And, he got the drugs from Amsterdam. And they'll give you a few facts, but I'd want to know about that guy. I'd be like, what's his family? Has he got a brother? Has he got a partner? And how does she feel? He's just got 11 years. And that's when you start dreaming up the fictitious world to go with the facts. Yeah. And I think writers are people who sit in cafes and they look out the window and they go, what if a car pulled up now and that woman got grabbed, or if somebody pulled a gun in here, or, it's that weird imagination thing. Maybe we find the real world a little too boring, so we have to
Do you find
play
with
these games.
with crime fiction that always goes to a dark place? Because I have a running joke with my wife. Whenever I go somewhere remote for a nice romantic walk, I'm always like, this would be a great place to dump a body. And she's like, Doug, stop it, come on.
Yeah, so particularly she's the only one around with you, Does she give you side eye at this point?
Yeah, come on. So moving on to like a technical slot, I want to talk a little bit about that. So I mean, you've got 20 books under your belt, and that's more than a book a year, right? Which some people listening to this will be absolutely horrified. How dare you be productive?
I know, I don't quite know how I'm that productive because I procrastinate like anyone's business.
Well, I was thinking, because I mean, you obviously don't suffer from writer's block, or do you? Or do you? What is your
the block
relationship to the blank page?
People tend to think of writer's block as being you've run out of ideas. You've written 2 novels and now you can't write that tortuous 3rd novel because you don't know what to do. I have the opposite problem with ideas. I've always got literally 18 books that I could write. They're all on a Word document with a sentence or 2.
Yeah.
This is the premise of that particular book, and one day I'll try and write that book. And sometimes those stories hang around for years and eventually I'll write them. So that's not my issue. My issue is having a day, literally yesterday, where I intended to write a lot to make up for the fact I didn't write much last week, and ended up just going, do you know what, before I do that, and I did a series of mundane chores like dropping off newspapers for recycling or dropping something off at the charity store. And then I went, do you know what, I'll go for a coffee before I go to the library. And then I went to the library and somebody was having a blooming Zoom meeting in the library. So
nice and
that
loud.
could have been a murder that I would happily have committed. So I then packed up my laptop and went somewhere else. And then I realised I hadn't charged my laptop, so I only had battery and I didn't have enough battery. And I just kind of went, do you know what, I'm going to write today off because I'm just not getting there. So what will happen then, probably tomorrow, because obviously I've been pretty busy today, I will write lots powered by guilt. And that's how I make up. So I have this vague idea of word count that I have to do so many words a day between now and deadline day. And I know what that is. And if I don't do that amount, then I'm going to slip behind. But some days I'll write 4 times that amount.
Okay.
And I've learned not to beat myself up too badly for a day like yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, I've just got to shrug and go, well, that was a bit useless, Howard. But, you've never missed a deadline. So hopefully a combination of panic, fear and guilt means that for the rest of the week I will make up that word count. And that sometimes you've got to force yourself just to start writing, just to say, even if you put the words, it is a week later, and then you just carry on writing, just write something, and some of that will be usable, and write what you want to write. I don't write chronologically, so I don't write the start of the book and then go all the way through to the end. I'll pick a scene and think, I'm in the mood to write that scene where Howard and Doug discuss how to get rid of a body, and that might be right in the middle of the book. And then I get scenes that are out of order and I have to copy and paste them. And it's an insane way of doing it.
But you also don't plan heavily, so how does that
So
work?
the planning usually constitutes the beginning and the end, but it also, I'll make notes like there has to be a conversation at some point about getting rid of a body.
Okay.
And then it might be later on they fall out about who was supposed to have disposed of the body, and that'll be a line.
Okay.
And then I'll eventually write that scene.
Right.
And I might write those scenes 100 pages apart in the same day, because one will lead to the other in my head.
Okay.
But then I'll have to put a whole lot more in the middle.
All this, yeah.
And then I always curse myself because I have this jigsaw that's all over the place. That it's like a 1,000-piece jigsaw, and I have to assemble it. And I've tried writing from the beginning, just writing, and it doesn't work for me.
Is that not working for you?
It's just weird. I have a strange brain. I've been told that by other authors. So I know, but do what works for you. And a lot of people do stop after 30 or 40,000 words. People who've never been published often say to me, I did try and write a book, but I got to 30,000 words. And I thought, well, maybe give yourself a break, go for a walk, meet some friends, take a week off, whatever. And when you come back to it, don't feel compelled to write the next bit, the 31,000 words. Go write your ending if you want to write your ending.
Yeah.
Or just write a bit 3/4 of the way through that you were looking forward to write, but you think you can't write that yet. So
that's
that might
really
get you back into it.
I think you're right. That it's almost universal. People hit that sort of doldrums, but And because like you're far enough away from the beginning that you've lost the excitement of it.
Yes.
And you're not close enough to the end to have the idea.
And that marvellous idea you had, you've convinced yourself was the worst idea ever by any author in history.
No one's ever going to want to read this.
It's an unreadable book. So, because we all have that self-doubt and paranoia. And you know what we don't get? A lot of artists get, and you're an accomplished musician, singer, what the whole hyphenate, you get applause, right? When I write a chapter in the library, nobody applauds. I have to go home and worry that it might not be any good. So with your writer's head, do you ever pick up on the contrast between getting a round of applause for singing a song and writing a book that months later somebody might review and say, yeah, it was good?
Yeah, it's
a bit different, isn't it?
It's a very different experience. It's like that sort of deferred gratification or whatever. That's like, you know that it's going to be a year before it's out or whatever. Whereas, if I'm drumming in a band and then people, I know if it's gone down well or not.
Straight away.
It's straight away. And sometimes that can be kind of terrifying in its own way. It's like, oh dear.
So imagine you've just done that, you've done your drumming, you've been with the band, and there's absolute silence because there's no audience. And you have no idea if what you did was good or not. And then you go away and convince yourself it probably isn't. Or whatever. And that's like being an author. Is you have to tell yourself it was probably okay. And you chip away and edit the thing to death.
Yeah, why do we do it? It's a real cycle.
idea.
It's a psychological thing as much as anything else, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
I think it must be a need for self-expression of some form, a desperate need to express yourself somehow. And I can't sing and I can't play music on anything. So, this is definitely, and I would never have had the self-confidence to be an actor or to be able to remember the lines. I don't know how they do that. It's a mystery to me. So this is my thing. But gosh, it's a bit, it can be really positive, and you have your ups and downs. I don't want to say it's all downs because it isn't. There's some great highs.
Yeah.
And I still love getting the box of books when you open that and you get the book in there for the first time and you think, oh, that was in my head and now it's it's a thing. It actually exists. So that's wonderful.
Well, thanks, Howard. Now it's over to Anne Morgan with the latest Royal Literary Fund news.
Anna Woodford's new poetry book, Everything is Present, is out now from Salt Publishing. Poems in the collection have won the Ledbury Award and the Wigtown Prize and have been featured in the Forward anthology. Described as a midlife coming-of-age tale, the work explores how grief and ageing can alter the past as well as the present. Tiffany Murray's My Family and Other Rock Stars has been published in paperback. A book of the year in the Sunday Times, Guardian, Independent and Daily Mail, the memoir describes Murray's experience growing up with her mum, a cordon bleu chef at the iconic recording studio Rockfield. It presents a whirlwind of a childhood where bumping into Freddie Mercury or even David Bowie was as normal as playing hopscotch. Andrew Miller has been shortlisted for the 2025 Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. Set during the big freeze of the winter of 1962 and 63, Miller's The Land in Winter follows two couples hemmed in by the snow in rural Somerset. The 6-strong shortlist for the prize, which is now in its 16th year, was revealed by way of a treasure hunt at Abbotsford, home to Walter Scott himself. The winner will be announced at the Borders Book Festival in June. Hay Festival will feature several Royal Literary Fund Fellows this year. On Sunday the 25th of May, Andrew Miller and Claire Chambers will discuss their latest novels with Julia Wheeler. The next day, Gwyneth Lewis will talk to Harriet Gilbert about her recent memoir, Nightshade Mother, before joining a panel discussion on Wales and its borders at St Mary's Church on Thursday the 29th of May. Meanwhile, Ian McMillan will host a special live recording of BBC Radio 4's poetry showcase, The Adverb, in the festival's Exchange Marquee on Friday the 23rd of May. Audience places are free for this event, and guests will include Natalie Ann Holborough, Len Penny, Michael Rosen, and Alex Wharton. For more information, visit hayfestival.com. And finally, 2 Royal Literary Fund Fellows will be taking part in a month-long event in Suffolk in the coming weeks. Organised by Suffolk Libraries in collaboration with Suffolk Archives and the University of Suffolk, Discover Reads includes writing workshops, archive rummages, a pop-up bookshop and 6 author talks. As part of the lineup, Sid Moore will talk about her recent novel, The Grand Illusion, at the Hold in Ipswich on Saturday the 24th of May at 1 p.m. Then, Jill Dawson will discuss her work in the festival's closing event on Wednesday the 4th of June at 6 p.m. For full details, visit suffolklibraries.co.uk/discovreads. And now, back to the studio.
So I think we're out of time, Howard. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
It's been great. It's fun.
It's been a good old chat. We've put the world to rights.
We certainly have.
And hopefully not depressed people
No,
about,
I hope not.
about the publishing industry and the writing
Should we do
life.
part 2 where I tell you all the upbeat stuff instead of some of the downbeat stuff?
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, thanks very much, Howard.
You're
If
very
any
welcome. Thank you.
listeners out there have any comments or writing questions that they'd like future episodes to deal with when we're chatting to other RLF fellows, please just message us on our social media channels. Thank you. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you'd like to share any comments or questions, please use the hashtag RLFCollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by James Robertson. Our producer was Anne Morgan.